It's a piece of technology so innovative and revolutionary that it got banned from almost every motorsport ever made. And was created not by one car instantaneously, but over many years of evolution before reaching its ultimate Super Saiyan form. That's right, we're not doing an episode on a car company or an individual car, even a racing series or a person. No, for the first time ever, we are doing an episode solely on a piece of technology called ground effect. Be warned, this may have some science. At the dawn of motorsports, at the beginning of the 20th century, the vehicles were incredibly difficult to drive, and even as the decades progressed with advancements in suspension and brakes and tire compounds, they were still some of the most dangerous sports known to man. And the reason why they were so dangerous is because the vehicles just lacked control. They also lacked safety, and so did the tracks, but another thing they lacked was control. And that is where a privateer racer named Michael May comes into play. In 1956, he bought a Porsche 550 Spider. And he was a smart guy. And he looked at an airplane wing and said, well, gee, that produces a lot of force in order to get that multi-ton airplane off of the ground and fly around, so how can I use that to give my car more control? Think, May, you're good at this. What if we put the plane wing on upside down so that it can push down instead of up? That means I should have more traction, because more weight means more traction, more force means more weight, which means more traction. So he did that. Sort of. It was more of a table than a wing, but it was still producing downforce. Now, he realized what he did after he did it and kept it on for the rest of his race. In fact, he entered his winged 550 Spider, which looks hilarious, I will add. Have you seen this thing? This is the pioneering of a revolutionary design that will be used to this day in every car, ranging from supercars to SUVs. And it started with this. A orange picnic table on top of a Spider. Well, the orange picnic table worked. In the 1956 Nürburgring 1000, it was a full second faster than the factory team entered by Porsche. So, Porsche, not happy that a privateer was faster than them, convinced the race officials to ban the wing because it, quote, obstructed driver visibility. They won, and the wing was successfully banned, although May got the last laugh because both Porsche and Ferrari awarded May contracts for his winged design. But it wasn't until the 60s that the wing truly became fully utilized, and it wasn't by Porsche, it certainly wasn't by Ferrari. It was by Lotus. They had already revolutionized Formula One by introducing the engine as a stress member part of the chassis, as well as sponsors with their 49, but they decided to push the 49 even further by putting not just a massive rear wing, but front wings as well. And this was an actual airplane wing upside down. Honest to God airplane wing, and it was fantastic. It worked to perfection, except for the really high wing, which was, to put it mildly, flimsy. So, after, several unfortunate accidents, they lowered the wing down, which meant it was in dirtier air, but it actually stayed on the car, which meant that it worked, and the 49 was a masterpiece. It won the championship outright in 1968, both drivers and manufacturers, for Lotus. And while they were winning the championships, the driver, Graham Hill, realized a downside with the wing. it slowed you down. Because as the air goes over the wing, it pushes it down, and it's great in giving you more turning, but on a straightaway, that increases drag, which means it goes slower. In fact, it was some 20 miles an hour slower than the non-winged car, which is a lot on the old high-speed Formula 1 tracks of the 60s and 50s. So, this became a trade-off. How do you balance high speed with handling through the corners? It was one or the other. And that is where we actually get into today's segment. The first inkling of ground effect was not by a European or an Italian or anything like that. It was by an American named Jim Hall of Chaparral. He was another brilliant guy. He helped reinvent active aero. He was a pioneer of active aerodynamics with the 2E, and the 2J, as it would be called, was even more radical. He got a snowmobile engine, some fans from an old World War II tank, and some skirts made out of a brand spanking new material called Lexan, and cobbled them together in what looked like a washing machine with wheels. It was called the 2J. And when you sealed, air quotes, it was about 0.5 millimeter off the ground, the skirts to the track, turned the fans on, the 2J got sucked to the ground like a vacuum cleaner. And that meant you could have unlimited grip at any speed. In fact, without the massive Chevy big block engine running, it could go 35 miles an hour off the fans alone. Those are some powerful fans for a little snowmobile engine. And those stupidly powerful fans gave the car 1.5 Gs of cornering force in 1970 when it worked. You see, the Chaparrals were revolutionary, no matter which one you look at, pretty much. However, they weren't exactly reliable. So, when it did work, it was some 2 seconds a lap faster than any other car on the track. But that's a big if. Meaning the 2J never really won anything, because it always broke down leading the race. And before it had a chance to be refined into a working model, McLaren, who, by the way, just for transparency's sake, had won the Can-Am Championship, where the 2J took part in, 4 times. Yeah, McLaren complained that if the 2J was not banned, it would become so dominant that it would ruin the competitiveness of the sport. Which sounds a little hypocritical, 4-time championship winning McLaren, but you know, whatever. Okay? You ain't seen nothing yet, the Germans are on the horizon. But anyway, the 2J was indeed banned because of the one little rule in the no rules Can-Am rulebook saying that there were no moving aero parts allowed, which was ironically formed because of the Chaparral 2E, the one that came before it. So, it had the basics of ground effect under its belt, and just like the first wing ever put on a car, it was banned before it had time to shine. So in order to actually get any sort of ground effect on a car, we have to fast forward another 5 or 6 years to Lotus, on the other side of the pond in Formula 1. Now yes, the Can-Am cars were faster than Formula 1 cars, but Formula 1 was getting faster every year and Can-Am was dead. So, Lotus was in Formula 1. And Colin Chapman, the boss of Lotus, was reading about airplane aerodynamics. And just like May, 20 years earlier, he thought about using those aerodynamics on a car. But instead of putting wings on a car, he decided to make the car a wing. So, he sent some engineers with unlimited resources, including unlimited money and unlimited materials, to Imperial College for wind tunnel testing. After 1,400 hours, they came across an idea that if the air went underneath the side pods, with a skirt on the edge of the side pods, it would generate a low pressure zone and a vacuum. This vacuum would form, the air would drastically increase speed, and that would suck the car to the road, giving it more downforce. But here's the kicker: unlike a normal wing, where there's drag from all the aero parts and the friction hitting against, the air was going freely under the car, so there was no slowing down at all. There was no drag. Lotus knew they had discovered something big. And when the Lotus 78 was unveiled in 1977, it was the first car ever to utilize what will become known as ground effect. And it was ridiculously fast. However, just like Lotus, lots of trouble, usually serious, it wasn't exactly reliable, just like the Chaparral that came before it. Mario Andretti alone had 5 engine failures in the 1977 season, most likely costing him championship, let's be honest. The 78 had other problems as well. The low pressure area was a bit too far forward, which meant that the low pressure was not going on the rear of the car, which meant the rear of the car had no grip. The front had all the grip in the world, the rear had nothing. So, in order to correct that and make it vaguely drivable, they had to put a massive rear wing on, which meant their whole downforce without drag solution didn't really work, and the car was very, very slow. So the 78 wasn't that great, if I'm honest. So the teams didn't think much of this ground effect shenanigans. They're like, what is that? Some silly British invention that always goes wrong while we invest in that. Well, Lotus didn't give up on it. And 1 year later, they unveiled the 79. They made the Venturi tunnels, which are those little slats underneath the car surrounded by the skirts, go around the entire body of the car, evenly distributing that low pressure zone, which means the drag was much lower. They didn't need a rear wing this time. In order to make the body as smooth as possible, because it's relying all on ground effect pretty much for its downforce, so they wanted to have it cut through the air as fast as possible, which meant it needed to be very smooth. And this created a side effect of the car looking absolutely fantastic with smooth flowing lines across the whole car. No other F1 car looked like it at all. And it was nicknamed the Black Beauty because of the John Player Racing paint scheme and the gorgeous looks. And that the only thing better than looks were the performance. The Lotus 79 was so fast, the car was easily 2 seconds a lap faster than its competition. And the cornering forces were so severe that the monocoque tub of the car was actually flexing around corners. Needless to say, the 79 dominated the 1978 F1 season, with Mario Andretti becoming the last American to win an F1 title and giving Lotus their last manufacturer's championship. The 79 was a catalyst for what would become known as the ground effect era. The other teams were caught completely off guard by how good ground effect could be, so they copied Lotus's design. Liger, Ferrari, and Williams all used Lotus's ground effect design, and with Lotus's secret out of the box, the small British company couldn't really compete with the big budget teams, and they fell by the wayside. Brabham also used ground effect, but in a slightly different way. They followed the Chaparral advice. They combined the fan of the Chaparral 2J and the skirts and upside-down airplane body of the Lotus 79, resulting in the BT46B. This made the cornering speeds even faster because it had the fan sucking the car to the ground, and it had the low pressure zone from the ground effect. It was the best of both worlds. In fact, when it won its first and only race it competed in 1978 before being voluntarily banned, it won it by 30 seconds to second place. Yeah, it was ridiculously fast. Another thing that was becoming ridiculously fast were the cars, and this became a bit of a problem. Because as the speeds increased and reliance on ground effect also increased, dangers become more apparent. If the suction broke, for instance, all that precious downforce around the corner was lost, and that meant you crashed 99.9% of the time. In the 1982 season alone, Gilles Villeneuve and Riccardo Pelletti died in crashes, while Didier Pironi suffered a career-ending accident because of these ridiculously fast speeds. And if they weren't killing or ending their drivers' careers, the ground effect cars were not only damaging the tracks from the suction they were causing, they're actually tearing the concrete up on some tracks. The cornering forces were so severe and such a jump up from the previous F1 cars that drivers reported dizziness and blurry vision. Things got so bad that by 1985, all F1 cars were forced to run flat bottoms, effectively ending ground effect in Formula 1. Now, ground effect was not just used in Formula 1, although that's where it was most popular. It was also used on a slightly smaller scale by Group C cars like the Porsche 956, and eventually spread to other teams. In fact, these cars were so fast, combined with the ground effect and their super streamlined bodywork, and their massive power figures, they could hit 250 miles an hour down the Mulsanne straights while generating 10,000 pounds of downforce at top speed. And it wasn't just the Europeans that were using ground effect. Remember Jim Hall, one of the original founders of the skirt idea? Well, he entered the 1980 kart championship and the Indy 500 with his last great car, the 2K. And the 2K single-handedly introduced ground effect to Indy cars. It was so dominant, it won the Indy 500 and the kart championship outright. But despite these successes and these immense figures, the dangers were obvious, and by the 1990s, almost every motorsport in the world had followed Formula 1's advice and banned ground effect altogether. So, is there anything that uses ground effect now? Well, actually, yes. IndyCar has been using it for the last few years. You see, in 2015, the Indy cars were making over 5,500 pounds of downforce. And the side effect is a lot of dirty air coming off the back of the car. Now, dirty air means, well, the car behind you has no downforce, which is bad, so they have to keep their distance, so they don't crash. Which also means the racing is not entertaining, and that's the whole point of motorsport. So, IndyCar and their chassis supplier, Dallara, began experimenting with less aero on cars. Problem is, less aerodynamics means, well, the cars are slower. No one wants that in racing. So, there was only one solution: to bring back ground effect. On a smaller scale this time. And the advantage with IndyCar is, well, since every manufacturer has to use the same chassis, there's never any competition to make a faster ground effect car, which means it's a lot safer and more manageable. In 2018, a new aero kit was completely reintroduced that produced significantly less turbulent air while still increasing the amount of downforce. This meant the cars were faster, they looked a lot nicer because they didn't have all these weird bits janking out of it, and the racing was fantastic. For instance, in the 2019 Indy 500 alone, in the last 3 laps, there were 3 overtakes for the lead, including one on the second to last corner. It's a fantastic racing series. In fact, the IndyCar ground effect effort has been so successful in generating good racing that Formula 1 is reintroducing ground effect in the 2022 Formula 1 regulations. So, ground effect is back. But I'm a little concerned about Formula One's involvement with it because, well, yes, Formula One has been having massive issues with terribly boring races, no overtakes, and, well, the same guy winning every year for the last 5 years. They don't have the same rules as IndyCar. They can make their own chassis, they can tune their own engines, and everything is completely unlimited. So, would that lead to another ground effect race, which could result in, well, a repeat of the 1980s? I certainly hope not, but Formula One has not had a great track record for keeping things fair and consistent, so we'll have to see what happens in the next 2 years. Fingers crossed.